Hello, my name is Nigel Marsh and I'm here today to talk about clinical psychology, what it is and importantly what it isn't. Psychology is a behavioural science. It's a discipline that studies human behaviour using the scientific method. And clinical psychology is the largest part of applied psychology. So psychologists study typical development, normal human behavior, and some people turn into practitioners where they take that knowledge and they apply it in particular circumstances. And so one of the first misconceptions people have is that clinical psychology is somehow different from psychology. It's something different, separate and unique. It's not. It's the application of psychology, which is the research that we have on mental processes and human behavior, and we take that and apply that knowledge to a particular individual or a particular case. So individual assessment, so we understand and help a particular person. And it's the oldest as well. It's been around since 1896. That was the first time clinical psychology term was used in the United States. And it's developed in not only Western, but also Eastern countries over that time. And the main model that clinical psychologists use is called the scientist practitioner. And so that's important to understand, that it is the application of science. Clinical psychologists cannot read minds. They're not mystics. They don't have any Marvel superpowers. They are applied scientists. And in this modern age, we talk a lot about transferable skills, and I think clinical psychology is an excellent example of transferable skills. So although clinical psychology initially did start in the area of mental health, and clinical psychologists were seen as specialists in assessment, diagnosis and treatment of psychological problems and mental illness, it has now moved into lots of other areas. And that's probably the second misconception. They think that psychologists can read minds, etc., and that it's all about mental illness. It's not just all about mental illness. Clinical psychologists work in a variety of fields, and it's also about mental health. Some of you may have heard of positive psychology, and this is the idea that what makes people unhappy can be different from what makes them happy. So just removing the things that make people unhappy doesn't make them happy. So life is not a dichotomy. We're not either happy or unhappy. It's actually a continuum, a line. And a lot of clinical psychology and professional psychology in recent years has started to look at what do we know about what makes people happy. As I said, originally, clinical psychology started looking at mental illness and working in that field, but it's expanded. Originally, it moved from working in mental hospitals or mental illness wards of hospitals into the community. That was called the community mental health movement, which was a long time ago, 60s and 70s. President John F. Kennedy in the United States actually started that. And then clinical psychologists moved from working with just mental illness in hospitals and the community to looking at problems of everyday living. So people who didn't have mental illness but were not able to achieve what they wanted to do, or were unhappy in relationships or their friendships, etc., and working with problems of everyday living. Then we also started working with people who had medical illnesses, so looking at adaptation to chronic illness. Chronic pain was diabetes, people with cardiac problems. Although these are medical problems and that's a medical disease, it's still a person who has to live with that disease. So clinical psychologists started working in that area. Some clinical psychologists took the skills and started looking at high performance individuals. And that's sort of that became organizational work psychology. What people know of as sports psychologists, they were originally clinical psychologists who went into organizational psychology and worked with high performing CEOs, etc., and then took that knowledge about working with high performers to working with athletes. So it's, as I said, it's transferable skills, but the main focus is still on working with people who experience some type of disadvantage. Although, as I said, you've got organisational settings and sports settings. By and large, clinical psychologists work with people who have disadvantage. Now, that could either be through, as I said, some sort of medical condition, some sort of mental illness, poverty, just difficulties in achieving. My own work as a clinical psychologist is in the area of neuropsych rehabilitation. So I work with people who had head injuries and strokes, helping them to adapt after the injury and get back to living a fulfilling life. I've worked with people who've had spinal injuries, burns and plastics. So not mental health, these people don't have a mental illness, but they've had some traumatic event that's impacted on them. So I think hopefully in this brief talk, I've given you an idea about what psychology is. It's a behavioural science. What it isn't, it's not a form of mysticism or mind reading. And clinical psychology is the application of psychology to an individual or a group or a family who have a specific problem, not necessarily mental illness. It's, as I said, the biggest area of professional or applied psychology. The demand is very high. And I'm sure everyone's a bit tired of hearing about COVID, but COVID has impacted the world tremendously. And what I'm finding in my practice and in my training, the demand for clinical psychologists is going higher than it's ever been before, because people are having difficulty adapting to what's been a major change in their life circumstances. So, as I said, that's a very brief introduction to what clinical psychology is and what it isn't, but hopefully that's been of some use. Thank you.